Right, hello everybody. Welcome back to Reddit Roasts. We are on Reddit Roast number 18 today, and John and I are both back on dry land. John from his trip and me from London. So we're back in our offices. John, great to see you again.
Nice to see you again, Sam. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday. We're recording on a Monday randomly right now. No big deal. Nothing to change. John, we've got some slightly, well, I want to say unusual profiles today, but actually some of them are not unusual at all. Some of them are very typical MBA MBA profiles. One of them, well, we have two financial analysts who are looking to pivot into investment banking, which is quite a common narrative that we're going to talk about. We've got an Indian software developer looking to pivot into product management. And interestingly, we also have a product manager who's looking to pivot out of product management. So maybe the grass is always greener on the other side. We will discuss more. John, should we dive into profile number one?
Let's do it.
All right. Am I overreaching for M7? This applicant asks. It's an Asian female, 4.5 years of work experience in real estate finance with a 675 GMAT, planning to apply to M7 programs and wants a profile evaluation. So demographics: Asian female, immigrant to Canada, 9 years old, BCom from UBC with a finance major and a 3.75 out of 4.33 GPA. GMAT focused edition of 675, like we said. Work experience, 4.5 years of work experience. And interestingly, John, the work experience is mostly in financial services, which is quite nice because we often have people looking to pivot into investment banking with completely random backgrounds. But this is a hardcore financial services background. It's also commercial real estate focused, which is very, very nice. They've worked on deals, large deals. They've had client engagement experience but not much leadership, formal team management experience. We'll talk about that. I don't think that's a deal breaker necessarily. Why MBA? Pivot into investment banking with a focus on real estate. Okay. Long-term goal, transition into a management role in real estate finance. So then asking all the usual questions about how competitive their profile is. John, talk to me. How do you see this profile?
I think overall, Sam, some solid bits. I think it's a good background for finance, but nothing that really jumps off the page for me based on what I see. I suspect there's more, and I would love to dig into it. Academically, 3.75 on the Canadian scale for UBC translates to about a 3.5, although it depends because there are some schools that use different conversion tables. That wouldn't be bad for a BCom from a reputable university. The Focus Edition GMAT is also decent. Overall, okay for a T10 level. Not competitive for M7, I'm afraid, and definitely not for HSW. Professionally,
The GMAT, you mean?
correct.
Okay.
Yeah,
Keep
yeah.
going on the work then.
Professionally, I like it. I think this is the fact that she's led deals is the biggest green flag for me. I work with a client who did something very similar, but in gold in Canada as well. Lots of rich leadership stories to share, and I'm sure there's something equivalent for her. So looking forward to seeing what those are. Demographically, Canadian Asian female, I would say neither overrepresented nor underrepresented. I would say more on the slightly more underrepresented side. Overall, I think it's a solid profile, Sam, but I think there are some nuances that we need to chip at. Over to you.
Okay, interesting. Well, let's start then with you just talking about the demographics and the sort of not overrepresented.
Correct.
How do you see immigrant to Canada? That jumped my attention. How do you see that? Is that a pro? Is that a positive? Is that a negative? How are the adcoms seeing the immigration?
I mean, Canadian female versus, if you're an Asian female in Canada, you're either a first gen immigrant, second gen, or third gen, right? So at some
Right.
point, I think it's a net positive, more so than being applying straight from Canada and being a Canadian native. So in my books, I think it is slightly URM, but I wouldn't say it's you know it's not like the OP is applying from a very niche region. Although
Right.
maybe she did emigrate from a niche region in Asia. We don't know that.
Okay. Okay, interesting. Okay, let's talk about the this GMAT then. It's a 675.
Mhm.
Where you said that that's the key blocker for you for this for her to be credible with M7s. What does that
Correct.
score need to be?
I think it needs to be closer to 685, 695 for an
Okay,
M7. I
so
think
relatively small uplift then.
it's a small uplift, although keep in mind that she is looking to stay in and, grow in the finance field. So you're going to be competing against a lot of other players with likely higher
Mm.
scores, right? And so,
Yeah.
yes, it's a 10 to 20 point lift, but even then, you're not going to be a standout in the academic bucket.
Mm. The investment banking group, as you say, are notoriously, good
Correct.
test takers and just quite a smart bunch.
Yeah.
And so that score needs to be, I think, probably as they're putting together the class, it's fair to say that the investment banking component of the class probably are expected to lift up the average GMAT, aren't they? In other
Yes.
words, that GMAT probably needs to be above the class average for an investment banking applicant. As an investment banker, you've got a lot of good things going for you, but this is one thing that is a slight headwind. You need to have a slightly higher score to really, really stand out in the competitive demographic, to competitive.
Certainly.
Okay, there's another thing that's typical of investment bankers, which you'll note, although OP isn't quite there yet, but finance nonetheless. No mention of extracurriculars at all. It's classic, like
Mhm.
busting, excuse my French, busting their ass in this finance and financial services, hasn't had time, or doesn't think the school is interested in their extracurriculars. All right,
Mhm.
let me say this once, let me say this clearly. Business schools do care about your extracurriculars. They really do care about what you're doing outside of work. They do not want people who are just solely focused on their job. They want to see people with a life outside of work, because those are the kind of people that contribute to the MBA program. It makes sense. And we're
Mhm.
seeing nothing along those lines. So I would say that answers very clearly one of the questions around,
Mhm.
particularly question 3 here, which is any advice on how to best frame my leadership experience, given limited people management. Extracurriculars, this is what they're for you to be able to take on leadership experience in an extracurricular setting where, frankly, the stakes aren't that high. You can
Mhm.
lead teams, you can still develop your leadership experience, and you can still use those stories in your MBA application. But
Yeah.
no mention of ECs right here. So that could potentially be a bit of a red flag.
Yeah. A potential derailer, Sam. I'm in a slightly better mood today, so I will give
Okay.
OP the benefit of the doubt. Perhaps OP had some belonged to or was a leader in a couple clubs in during her time at UBC.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps she was part of an employee resource group at her firm that enabled her to contribute to the welfare of others outside the scope of her role. And so if there's anything like that, I think that's also worthy of discussing and giving them credit for the EC bucket.
Yeah. Cool. I'm aligned. I mean, to be clear, OP, being coming from finance, you're not expected to have that much formal leadership experience from the work environment. Finance is a notorious. Finance applicants are notorious for this, in that you don't really get management experience in an investment bank. You don't really get management experience until you're like MD, really, and that's what 15 or whatever years of work experience. So you're not on your own as a finance applicant, not having much leadership experience, but you are expected to compensate for that with extracurriculars. So that's going
Mhm.
to be really, really important. John, let's say that OP does have some extracurriculars
Yep.
and can point to a GMAT score of 695, in other words, gets a 20-point hike. Do you think
Mhm.
she's then credible for M7?
I think with a good narrative, yes.
With a good narrative. That's what it's going to
Yes.
come back to, right? And I
Yeah.
guess the final point on that, without laboring this too much, but explaining why you want to pivot into investment banking, and with a focus on real estate. They're gonna. It's not a difficult sell. They're going to know that if you're doing kind of middle office work at a financial services firm and you want to pivot into a front office role, that's quite an easy explanation. They will get that, but it does need to be clear, and it will. You can't just say I want more money. right? You've got
Yep.
to have that really impactful story explaining
Hmm.
why that's interesting. A classic example of this is doing work with an investment bank and seeing what they do on the investment banking side and thinking, oh my god, I love that. And starting the career goals essay with, I was liaising with John who was at this bank, and
Hmm.
I just saw myself in his role. And so after the
Yep.
MBA, I want to do what John does. Like that
Yep.
sort of story can really work. Um, and I think I agree with you, John. I think with a 20-point uplift on the GMAT score and a
Hmm.
couple of extracurriculars, I think the profile could be credible.
Yep.
Great stuff. Okay, should we move on to the next profile?
Yes.
Okay, let's do it. So, profile number 2. So, applicant number 2 is aiming for fall 2028. In other words, is a year away from applying. So, he's really focused on what to do in the meantime. So, let's talk about that. So I begin preparing for fall 2028 MBA applications. Good. So that I assume that means graduating fall 2028, applying fall 2026, which is September in about a year and a half's time. Okay. Via the consortium. For those unaware, the consortium is a group that helps minority applicants, particularly Black and Latino applicants, to apply to MBA programs kind of at scale. I think it also reduces their fees that they have to pay when they apply to lots of schools. So my goal is to pivot into investment banking as well, ideally Texas, open to other ideas. So, John, demographics: 22 years old, Hispanic male, first gen American, first gen college. Undergrad was non-target, BBA in finance with a GPA of 3.35. Graduated in 3 years. Dean's List, first 2 years. Maybe something happened then later in the degree that explains why the GPA has dropped off so much. Has a bunch of Greek experience there. Work experience. Big tech, corporate finance. A year so far. We'll have 4 years of work, full-time experience by matriculation. Okay, 4 years is nice. Current role as a financial analyst involved in forecasting, cost analysis, data visualization, regular cross-functional collaboration with leadership, high visibility deliverables. Looks like there's quite a lot, John, of good, impactful work experience there already. Test tech, well, okay, aiming for a 325 score. Everybody's aiming for a 325 score, so we'll see how that goes. Extracurriculars and leadership, led finance organizations during undergrad. Founder of a sneaker fashion brand. Cool. Plan on building and leading financial literacy initiatives for Latinos and doing first generation mentorship and coaching. Goal to break into investment banking. Texas. Will leverage consortium MBA recruiting. Target bulge bracket investment banking. Okay. Now the question is in terms of which schools, John. OP is considering Rice Jones with the strong Texas ties, Emory Goizueta, Atlanta, consortium support, etc. USC Marshall kind of ranks similarly to the other schools in the ranks, but obviously on the West Coast. And he's maybe thinking about Ross and Stern and Darden and sort of slightly higher ranked schools. And is same thing, considering the how to improve profile, where do I need to be strong, and which schools should I be considering? Usual questions. Okay, John, profile evaluation. How are you seeing this profile academically?
Yeah, Sam, I like this profile overall. As you said, on the younger side, but he's not applying until a couple years down the line. So I love the mentorship, the story tracks, definitely consortium material for those 220 schools.
Yep.
Academically, GPA is on the lower side. I would be curious, as you have mentioned, to explore why there was a dip in the last 2 years. Obviously, grounds for an optional essay. That GRE score will need to track to at least a 324 plus. Good thing is that OP has time to work on getting that score up with enough time and with enough coaching.
Mm-hmm.
Professionally, financial analyst at a big tech firm, hard to demonstrate leadership at this point in time, but really good of OP to have talked about all the impactful things that he's done. Hard to show growth, but the cross-functional collaborations, the managing up, all of that will work very hard. And it looks like, OP may be on track to get promoted during that time. If not, get recommenders to talk about, how he might be on track for promotion or is performing at above his level. I
Mm-hmm.
love this sneaker side business. I worked with someone some time ago who scaled a vintage watch startup. I also worked with someone who bought and resold sneakers. both got into great schools. B schools love this story. I know OP is not applying to HBS, but HBS has SA2 is about curiosity and growth. I think this could be a really nice one to talk about. Demographically, again, as I mentioned, consortium material, first-gen American, first-gen college, really embraces the heritage. And what's remarkable about this candidate is that he really tries to pay back. He's involved in mentorship and financial literacy. All those great extracurriculars are going to help him build a bulletproof case for ECs in those schools.
And consortium as well, because there's consortium application essays where they're going to ask, how are you going to give back to the consortium community?
Correct.
And that's exactly what they're looking for. Yeah, nice. Okay. So, I mean, I'm excited by this profile as well in some regards. So I worked with a consortium client last year who applied to, as I say, consortium makes it easy to apply to lots of schools. He applied to 15 schools. He got admitted to 12 of them and got $850,000 of scholarship money. This guy is just absolutely crushing it. And, parallels to this profile in lots of ways, specifically the Hispanic male aspect. Now, John, what do you think then about these target schools? So there's obviously a Texas focus, and that was one reason why Rice Jones is on the cards. Let's assume that OP gets a 327, let's say 327 GRE score. So solid, but not outstanding, and sort of opens doors, but not like we're not going M7. 327 with this profile. Do you think that Rice, Jones, Emory, USC are where they should be applying? Should they be going higher? If so, why?
I think, I think there's a regional focus there. I think with the 327 and with the right narrative, I think, again, I like OP's story. I think there's a lot of impactful things that he did at work. And I think, aiming a little higher could look like applying to a Duke Fuqua. I think a lot of folks coming out of Duke Fuqua have opportunities like the ones graduating out of Rice, potentially even, McCombs in that region, right? And so when OP mentions reaches, I think Michigan Ross, Darden, UNC, Kenan Flagler, Cornell, I think those are all fair game with a 327. So don't stand back yourself. OP.
It's basically what it comes. It's basically what it comes down to, right? That as far as we can see, that it comes down to that GRE score. Good GRE score, top end of that list. Low GRE score, bottom end of that list.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Let's talk. I want to talk to you more about this sneaker thing. Can you give us an idea of? Let's say I'm an applicant and I've got this sort of side hustle, right? That's typically what the sneaker trading is. It's some sort of side hustle, maybe a big Instagram following and selling some, I don't know, whatever, some relatively minor. It's not enough to pay the bills, but it does take up time and it is interesting. Yeah. How, in your experience, can applicants leverage that to get into a business school?
Yeah, I think it's, you don't just want to treat it as, I'm finding this whatever margin and I'm going to exploit this margin and make money off of it. I think, taking it from, a hobby to somewhat of a small business. This is what I learned throughout the process. This is how the business scaled when I involved, working with another person, partnering with someone else. I think making it bigger than just I'm buying and reselling sneakers would make this story a little bit more interesting to business school, especially if you're able to leverage many of the same skills that entrepreneurs do scaling their businesses. There could also be a story behind, targeting specific brands, buying from specific demographics, or that could also be play into an eventual narrative. But I think at the minimum, showing the entrepreneurial chops is going to be what we'll want to see from this side business.
Yeah, I'm absolutely on with you on this. I think the key for me, the bit that makes this exciting for me, is the leadership essay stories. The stories where they're asking, tell us about a time when something leadership-y, teamy happened. A classic essay. Kellogg have got one. Harvard have got one, like you mentioned. That story could come from your main work, but it could also come from this. could also come
Mhm.
from sneaker experience. Just imagine, like, tell us about a time when you discovered what kind of leader you want to be, right? It's a sort of a
Sure.
classic leadership story. You could easily say, well, I was building up my side hustle when I
Hmm.
encountered a particular client who behaved a
Hmm.
certain way, or a supplier who had behaved a certain
Hmm.
way and challenged my values.
Sure.
Right? Maybe a supplier sends a wrong invoice and they've
Yeah.
undercharged me by 10x. There's a
Hmm.
zero missing from the invoice. Now I could pay it; they probably wouldn't notice and move on.
Hmm.
But that's not how I am as a leader. That's not how I am as a person. That's not my values.
Hmm.
So I
Sure.
called them and I told them, look, you've misinvoiced me and I owe you more.
Hmm.
And that's the kind of leader I want to be, someone who builds with integrity. So
Yeah.
it's those, to me, it's that kind of story that can come out of this small business. It doesn't matter how big the business is. If you've
Hmm.
called them and said, look, you've invoiced me wrong, that story still applies and that
Sure.
translates across industries. So I think that's why that's what really excites me about that particular line, is
Yeah.
the story potential from it. It could be so,
Yeah.
so nice. Okay. So I think the conclusion here is it's going to be GRE dependence. The
Hmm.
GPA is below average, compensated for by good work experience, etc. It comes down to the GRE. I want to see that into the 324, 5, 6. If you can get it higher, maybe like you could justify an M7 application, maybe. But that's, I think, the ballpark you're playing in, OP. If we can help, get in touch. Okay, John, next profile. We have another quite common story, I dare to say. Um, good. Sorry, one last thing, John, actually. One last thing. Let's come back. The question is about IB placement at Rice Jones. That was one of the questions OP was asking. Employment industry by function. I went into the Rice employment report and I found this. 27%, biggest group of the cohort, went into financial services. I suspect many of them were investment banking. That is a good sign. That is a good sign that Rice right now is placing people into investment banking. OP, that's what you want to be focused on. Recent employment reports. That's how you're going to answer this question. And I think it's positive. I think if you can get a higher GRE, then by all means shoot higher. But I do think Rice will give you what you need. Okay, right, John. A bit of a false start there. Let's come back to profile evaluations. The next person is an Indian engineer looking to pivot into product management. Okay, and he's asking, how can I strengthen my profile? So, in lots of ways, John, it's quite a generic profile, I think. Tech analyst, 4 years of experience, exposure to product management via a top tier client, led nonprofit teams, now exploring if an MBA is the right way to pivot into product management. So, I currently work as a Salesforce developer, an analyst at a Fortune 500 firm. That could vary quite a lot. I wish we had more information, but okay, Fortune 500 with 4 years of work experience across both development and admin roles in SaaS. My client is one of the top company's top tier global tech accounts. So I've collaborated with PMs, observing how they shape product direction, balancing business needs, and own a life cycle. Right. So OP genuinely does seem pretty kind of focused on this PM role. Outside of work, led a team at a nonprofit education initiative. We created onboarding playbooks, education content, lots of the usual stuff there. Post MBA goal PM. Ideally in tech/consumer, John. Tech/consumer. That's interesting. Long term, would love to combine tech and passion for food to launch something of my own. Bit of repetition there. GMAT score is a 625. 625. Trying to figure out, is an MBA the right viable route for me, and how can I make my MBA pivot smoother? Okay, John, let's start with the profile. How do you see the profile?
Well, Sam, this is quite vanilla. I'll say you have an IT focused Indian looking to get into product management.
Yeah.
So that's that. I think academically, non-target school in a 625. Um,
We don't know the GPA either.
we don't know GPA either. That's low for any pool, and that's a overrepresented pool. I mean, T30 is, I mean, T30 is a lower reach than the other schools we've been discussing, but I think that's still going to be a potential problem. Um,
Yeah, right.
Professionally, yep. Sam?
Yeah, we don't know how bad the GPA is, do we? That's
Yeah, we
we
don't.
can't really talk about. Let's assume that because it's not. Let's be cynical. Because it's not there, it's bad. If it was good, he would have put it down. So let's
Correct.
assume it's bad. So it's a bad GPA and a bad GMAT. It's not looking good, right?
To be fair, it's probably going to be a CGPA, and schools don't take, 10-point GPAs into their averages. And so if OP can get that 625 to a higher 600s, then T30 might be fair game. Okay, but
Mhm.
as it looks today, it doesn't look great.
Yeah.
Um,
Work.
Professionally, yeah. I mean, developer and analyst with multiple certs, for a company we don't quite know. Fortune 500 is a start. Uh, I don't really see any evidence of impact, growth, evidence of working with people. So I'm a little bit bearish in this category. And then obviously demographically, OP is an ORM. And so
Yeah.
overall, it's not a profile that stands out on paper. I would be willing to give OP the benefit of the doubt. But as it looks today, I don't see anything much that would make them competitive for a reputable MBA program.
Very diplomatic of you, John. I think it's a mess. I'm really worried about that GPA not showing up. I understand it's engineering. I'm sure it was tough. Non-target school, no GPA. It's not going to be great. Okay. Look, let's be constructive then. We don't like the profile. We think with that GPA, T20 is going to be a stretch. T30 is going to be a stretch, sorry. The question is assuming he can get those stats up, does an MBA open the door to product management in your experience?
It does. It does. I think, having the technical chops definitely lends itself well to at least a product management in an industry where they have familiarity with. But you still need to have some kind of people management experience, and I'm not seeing much of that in OP's profile.
Hmm. Okay. Okay. I mean, obviously, we're not going from that much information and the bits missing, but I would say that for the people that I have worked with who have made this transition successfully, a couple of things that they had in common. One was outstanding tech experience from branded tech places, right? Whether
Hmm.
that's like tech within big tech, like a Google,
Yep.
a Fang, or whatever, that would count really strong. That would help.
Yep.
Another aspect is somebody who's been through a formal tech development program. A lot of the consulting firms like Accenture, etc., have these
Hmm.
best in class tech training programs that they offer. That's another way of saying, look, I'm seriously qualified in tech. If it's Fortune 500 and they haven't heard of the brand, there might be a question mark there. The other thing they've had is exposure in terms of things like product launches and like go to market strategies. Now, OP has said, to be fair, that he collaborates with product managers on things like shaping product direction, but he's not actually done it himself. So the people that have made this transition, in my experience, again, is people who have stepped into a product management role and done that for a
Hmm.
substantial, few months and really had that first-hand experience, know that they're good at it, and want to use an MBA to pivot into that full time. Those tend to be the people that make this transition well. I'm not entirely sure that a PM is the right narrative here. Obviously, OP, once you're on the program, if you get in and you want to apply to PM roles, then go for it. But as far as your application is concerned, it might make more sense to apply to something like a to have a narrative as something more like a business development role, for example,
Hmm.
in the industry in the niche that I'm already in, and that might be a bit more sort of MBA-ish and might be doable. I don't know. What do you think, John?
Yeah, I see your point there, Sam. I do think, for someone to go from a, individual contributor engineer role to PM, they need to have something, beyond just the function of having been an engineer.
Yeah.
I think BD could work, but I think they also need to show experience, dealing with people and influencing others, for that to be a worthy transition. But I think that probably would sit better for for based on the background that OP has today.
Yeah. I am pointing at question two specifically. Would certifications like Scrum, ACP, etc., help strengthen my application? I don't think so. No, I don't think you need to be focused now on more development stuff. You need to be focused on the other side of the equation. The development stuff, if you've got what, 4 years of development experience already, it'll be more like 6 by the time you apply. That's plenty, right? You've got
Mhm.
you're probably quite good at that already. I would say it's the other side. It's the product launches, the people side, the leadership experience. It's those things
Mhm.
I think you need to be building out because you're going to need to tell those stories. It's one of the key things the AdCom are going to be looking for, and you need something like that that you can use in your leadership stories for your essays to be credible. That's my thought on how this applicant can strengthen his profile. Okay, John, let's move on to the next profile.
Sure.
M7 target now and a whopping 760 GMAT. Nice. Okay, demographics. Asian male, US citizen, 28 years old, math major with a 3.76 GPA from an Ivy League university. 760 GMAT. I'm not surprised because OP is obviously very good at English and very good at math. So, yes, they're crushing the GMAT. Great. Well done. Work experience product manager at an ed tech, promoted twice, been there 3 years, launched and scaled features, led go to market strategies in the US and Canada, had informal mentorships and formally managed junior PMs, hoping to get more direct reports, etc. So a bit of leadership, but not huge. Drove the adoption of analytics tools. Okay, it's quite nice. And started a new job as a fellow at an education venture in the fall. Will be starting. So in the middle of changing roles, kind of. Okay, non-profit, education-related non-profit experience in college, volunteer and fundraising, curriculum developer for a coding boot camp, from what I can tell, advisory board for a community fund, writing partner at a local college, college access nonprofit. So more education stuff. MBA, why MBA? Short term, pivot into people management roles. Okay, so away from PM into more people management roles, more strategic roles within EdTech. Long-term goal, wants to become CEO or CEO of an EdTech or social impact startup, aiming for M7. Mentioned Stern and Haas in there as well. What are the chances and how do I stand out? So, John, what are his chances?
Well, I like this profile, Sam. Again, look, not a typical IB or PE background, OP, but I like your background. There's a great number of folks who've gotten in that Sam and I have helped, who have come from less traditional backgrounds like yours, that have great successes. Let's dive into the metrics here. Look, 376 in math from an Ivy with a 760. I think that's a winning ticket. Love to see that. Professionally, I think, look, one of the drawbacks of some VC applicants is that they either come straight from undergrad, growing up in the organization, or come at it from finance. I think you have tangible operational experience as a prior product manager in a similar industry where you've demonstrated expertise and made your mark. This is all great. I think launching products from scratch, demonstrating impact, demonstrating experience working and influencing people, this is all really, really tangible, impactful work that, will work very hard across your resume, recommendations, and so forth. Demographically, look, an Asian male is, by nature an ORM, but I think everything else in your profile is a green flag. So, love to dive into this candidate more, Sam. Over to you.
Yeah. No, I'm aligned. I love the profile. Okay, so let's pick. Let's nitpick at the gaps and the bits that aren't great because we know the academics are great. Fine. Changing jobs. So OP is starting a new job as a fellow at an education venture fund in the fall. So in the fall, September, October, that's around the time of submitting applications. Could that be an issue, John? And if so, how does OP mitigate it?
I think that could be a slight issue, but here's what I like about this. I think it's in the same sector that he's been in
Yeah.
before. I think if he's able to leverage the operational work that he's done advising portfolio companies in education, I think it could look well. The only hairy thing is going to be, working with recommenders, If you have that single new company in your resume,
Mm.
do you have a bullet point explaining what you're doing? I mean, in the grand scheme of things, by the time you matriculate, you will have about 9 months having worked in that company. But I think
Mm.
net, I think, having gone from PM to venture capital is a plus. It's something that people want to do with an MBA program. So I think it's a good look, but just making sure that, the motivations for an MBA are still strong.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Your point on the recommenders is interesting there. What you're saying is if you've just started a new firm, and this is happens across all industries, not just product management.
Hmm.
If you've started at a new firm, you've got a decision to make. In fact, you've got two decisions to make. The first one is, do you use a recommender from your new firm, knowing that they haven't really known you for very long, you haven't done that much there, and you haven't really made an impact, and you possibly don't want to tell them that you're about to leave again up for an MBA even though you've only just joined. That's one. And then the second is, do you even add it to your resume, given that you haven't technically started that job yet? Let's say you
Hmm.
apply in the summer, you say you hit submit in August, and the job's due to start in September.
Hmm.
You'd be well within your rights to just not mention that you're starting your
Yeah.
new job. And it might make your application simpler to not include it. So you've got two decisions there that you need to make. You need to be really strategic about how to position yourself best. Good. John, the other question that I had, which is something that's for me a little bit of a pink flag. I'm not sure. EdTech. In my experience, EdTech is not a particularly easy industry to come from in MBA applications. Why? It's very fragmented, right? An EdTech startup, there are billions of EdTech startups. You throw a stone and hit an EdTech startup. They're everywhere. So it's fragmented and there's no individual brand that is
Hmm.
dominating that space that you can, gain that brand value from, unless you're maybe involved in, I don't know, like a Google's EdTech arm,
Hmm.
for example. Like that might work. But most people in EdTech come from brands that schools don't recognize or that aren't recognized.
Hmm.
So, and certainly not household names. So that's going to be acting against you. That's one thing. John, any way to mitigate that, or are you even worried about it?
I am less worried about it than you are, Sam. Although I do see where you're coming from. I mean, not all ed tech companies out there are a Coursera or something that schools know well, right? And
Hmm.
if it sounds like this is a reputable company because, he's 10 million users aren't an insignificant number. And so maybe talking a little bit about,
Hmm.
how funded the startup or company is, like what the valuation is, whether it's backed by notable investors, whether the founder is an ex Google or it comes from a brand that people knows. That's valuable information to talk about in the resume, and assuming that OP is getting a recommendation from someone at the firm, if that person has come from a brand that schools respect and know well, that also helps round out any doubt they have around
Yeah.
the legitimacy of this company.
I love it. There might be a case. So, for the context here is when you're writing an MBA resume, you can, if you want, include a line underneath the company title on the MBA resume
Hmm.
saying what that company does. Now, obviously,
Yeah.
if you've worked at Google and Meta, you probably won't write that description because everyone knows who these companies are. But in this case, it might be worth including a line about a short line underneath the title of the company on the resume describing what the company does. Just, don't use too much real estate for this, but one short line saying, um, you know, a leading ed tech with 10 million plus users backed by Sequoia, right?
Yep.
That
Yep.
that is a way to gain credibility if they've not heard of the brand itself, as John says. Okay, good. Um, Interesting. John, there's one other thing that I have a bit of beef with, which is this point around like I know HSW is a crapshoot, but how are my chances? Now, like yes, HBS, Stanford, Wharton, they are a crapshoot to some extent, but too many times in my experience, people say they're a crapshoot because they got denied. And therefore, it's
Hmm.
easier on the ego to say that was because it's
Hmm.
lucky.
Hmm.
Actually, we see year in, year out profiles that we bet on to get into HSW. When you look at our pricing plan, we have you only pay the second payment if you get through to interviews. And year in, year out, we take in Harvard, Stanford, Wharton clients who we put our money where our mouth is there. And that's because, yes, it's a crapshoot in a way, but also there are the same things that they're looking for that we know they're looking for. And those are the things we've talked about. Those are leadership potential, solid academics, promotions, branding, the same themes again and again and again. So I have a little bit of a pushback on that. And the other thing, John, that I'm a bit grumpy about here is this idea of, I know I don't come from a typical IB or P background. There's a bunch of IB people watching this saying, I wish I came from an ed tech nonprofit, because I got to go up against all the bankers. I got to get a 700 GMAT score, 705 GMAT score to be competitive, and you don't. So let's not typecast too much. The grass is always greener on the other side. OP, your profile is strong if you can make the changes that we've talked about, implement the changes we've talked about. I don't think you'd be stronger if you were in an IB position necessarily at all. Okay. John, anything final that I've missed here?
There is, besides, OP, besides talking about their motivations for an MBA program and a narrative, a lot of schools have an essay about how they're going to contribute to their MBA program.
And Wharton essay too, for example.
Exactly. So, and Wharton asked, 450 words. They asked you to devote 450 words to it. This is where you talk shop, helping, Wharton SaaSify some of their curriculum, designing boot camps, helping grow Wharton in SF, replicate. I mean, there's so many ideas and ways you can bring all your ed tech experience into tangibly helping the school look better. And that's what's going to capture the spirit and imagination of AdCom. Most people say, I will be a VP at this club and lead a trek to Peru. This person can really add value to the school, and it would be a mistake for him not to mention any of this.
I love that. So for context here, let's take a step back. The number of people who are applying to MBA programs without a software engineering background, who are saying, I'm going to use AI to disrupt this random industry that I've been working in. They don't have any AI experience. They're not developers, and they're hoping to partner with developers that they'll meet on the MBA to go and launch some venture, for example. Now, so then they're the non-technical founders, I think is the word for it. Now, you, even as a non-technical founder, need to be able to speak the language of developers. And one way of doing that is by, during the MBA program, joining a boot camp that is hosted by a developer who's putting on a boot camp, who has development experience, edtech experience, that knows how to run one of these things. That is exactly what you would need as a non-technical founder, and that OP is exactly what you can offer. And the schools will light up when they see that. That's the kind of thing that's going to get you in. John, fantastic point. Well made. Awesome. Anything else I've forgotten?
Oh, good luck to OP. Get in touch.
Good luck to OP. Get in touch. I think you're in a very strong position here. John also would love to help you frame this for Harvard, Stanford, Wharton. Okay, next profile. M7 also got that. Sorry, got that twice. Next profile. Chances at HBS. Okay, I'm a 31-year-old female first-generation college student and first-generation immigrant. Moved to the US after a sports injury, ended my career as a professional athlete. And since then, I've transitioned into business and entrepreneurship. Okay, academics. Started at a two-year community college with a 4.0 GPA, then transferred to a top 10 public university to finish my degree in economics, ended up with a 3.3 GPA. GMAT focus is 635. Professional experience, 2 years working at a major fintech with a promotion, 5 months at an investment position in a VC firm, and then I've been running my own VC firm, raised and deployed a couple of $1 million of capital. Also started a niche e-com business that's profitable and growing. Post-MBA, want to help small businesses scale. Extracurricular experience. Board member of an alumni network with 500 members. Co-founded a student entrepreneurship club during undergrad. Founded and coached my community's college team, taking them to nationals. And a national collegiate champion in my niche sport. top rank in the world, which earned me a green card. I would love feedback on, do I stand a real chance at HBS without taking the GMAT focus, without retaking the GMAT focus? Jess, should I boost my score? Any other tips on how to frame my story effectively? Okay, interesting one. John, how do you see the profile?
This certainly is an interesting one, Sam. Look, I like this profile overall. I think there are a couple flags in here to take note of. Firstly, I admire the hustle, all that OPs achieve. It's a tall mountain to climb for HBS. I don't think it's impossible, but let's dive into it. Look, academically, the 635 is going to be it's going to be a thorn for OP. I think this needs to be at least a 675, given the 3.33 and the fact that OP has attended community college with a decent GPA and transferred to a reputable public university and tanked that GPA is going to be a red flag. And so that's why the GMAT or GRE has to make up for that shortfall. Professionally, VC firm, like people often measure VC firms by, how much assets you deployed, the size and stature of your portfolio companies, but you're running it on your own. You raise your own fund. It's not a small feat, and the journey is sometimes even more important than the outcome, right? Talk about We can talk about how to message this, Sam, but it's how OP has identified their portfolios, shaped their portfolio. That plus OP small business really shows a great entrepreneurial spirit that she should mine for this application. I also love the sport angle, the fact that you were able to get a green card out of it. Harvard loves athletes. I think that can be a core part of a narrative. This would work very well for essay number 2 or essay number 3 about growth and curiosity. Demographically, first-gen female, immigrant, slightly on the older side, but I don't actually see this as much of a problem, just given how unconventional the background, just how unconventional their profile is, Sam. So I am cautiously optimistic about this profile. Understandably, that is only if those academic gaps are addressed. But curious to hear what you think.
Yeah, I think OP's got a bit of an ego, I'm afraid. I think what's happened is OP has been helping small businesses scale and immersed herself in the VC landscape and has been surrounded by HBS people. Notice there's no mention of any other school. They've just got like HBS in their mind. So it's not like they really want an MBA. I get a sense they just want HBS.
Yeah.
That's always a red flag for me. And it makes me feel like somebody is like, I was surrounded by HBS people and I was swimming in those ponds, therefore I'm qualified to be at HBS. Not with a 635 GMAT, you're not, I'm afraid, nor with a 3.3 GPA. This is an issue. I think that given that GPA, look, I've worked with athletes before who've done great things. They've got into top business schools, including Harvard. That doesn't allow them to have a GMAT that low. Right? That's a solid 50 odd points below the average, right? With a GPA that's also lower than the average by point.
Yep.
Huge gaps. So if you're HBS and you're looking for somebody who's grown businesses, who's deployed capital, who's an athlete, I'm willing to bet there's going to be someone better. Yeah, in fact, I'll bet quite a lot on that. So I think there's a problem here. I think that the best in class, what I consider best in class in this little niche last year, who raised 30 million in a Series A and set up several VCs before that, deployed many, many millions. That's best in class to me. And even then, Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, there's a question mark. For me, this is beyond question mark. It's just out of their league. So I'm a firm no, I'm afraid, John. Chance at HBS.
I do see the ego a little bit, Sam. Yes, I think if someone just says HBS, I think your intuition's right on this one.
Okay.
I will not challenge you on this position. I think you swayed me.
Very diplomatic. Okay, let's be productive. Last point on this. Any tips to frame the story effectively? Look, I'm going to say this to athletes in general. You are in a strong position to apply to MBA programs, but you really need to you need to frame your contribution to the sport after the MBA in an interesting way. A classic is joining the governing body, for example, of your particular sport, right? If you were a former best in the world at this niche sport and you have an MBA from a decent school, not HBS, but a decent school, and you say, I want to join the governing body and lead the governing body of this niche sport after the MBA, and here's where I see, this is where I want to take the sport into a more inclusive landscape, into new markets, open it up to I think this is a woman, but maybe opening it up to women if it's a male-dominated sport, et cetera, and making a case for that, for you driving change in that sporting environment. That's how you frame your story effectively, and that's how we've seen athletes across sports do really, really well in MBA applications. I think I've probably talked your head off, John, but any other points you'd like to mention on that profile?
Godspeed to this applicant.
Okay. Very diplomatic. Okay. John, we've got 2 bonus questions today. 2 bonus questions. First one. Starting an MBA this fall, moving from India to the US, would love to hear from students what they wish they'd known earlier, what you wish you'd known earlier about the MBA experience, about recruiting, about moving to the US. John, what do you wish you'd known before you started your MBA?
Before MBA programs start, there are often, remedial workshops or programs that people attend to brush up on things that they may have gaps in. Some schools call them math camps, other schools call them by a different name. Before I was attending Haas, there was an option for me to attend something similar. I think while I did not attend it, I wish I did. I think it's a very helpful program to just, first it's an extra opportunity to meet your classmates, and being part of a program that you either have a shared misery over or you enjoy the company of. And I think those programs can really cut down the amount of time you have onboarding to more technical aspects of classes. So math camps is one. I have a couple others, Sam, but I'm not sure if you have any experience there.
Cool. The idea of doing a math camp now, I can't in good heart encourage you to go and do a math camp because I wouldn't want to do it. But but I get where you're coming from. There are some quite quant heavy classes. I guess it depends on your goals as well. Like, are you gonna pivot into something that needs, are you gonna be taking quant classes, etc.? Then maybe that is more relevant. That is fair. I would say my big thing is around the biggest thing that I underestimated was the program length. So I studied at Oxford. I did a 1-year program, and I thought a year, I kind of went into it. A year is a really long time, and actually a year is not a long time. I would have really loved to have had a second year. So in some ways, and in other ways, it was great to get back to work. But in some ways, it was great. I wish I'd had a second year, and it was something I didn't really consider. I just thought an MBA is an MBA, and I wish I'd had a second year in a way. That would have been really nice, because the 1 year was really, really intense. And I think, John, that sets up my second point about what I wish I had learned is getting a bit of a head start, right? Like starting to network with people before the program starts, starting to learn the things that I wish I'd learned, meeting my classmates before the program start. I didn't really do any of that till it started, and I probably should have done. Were you the same?
Yeah. Similar in some ways.
Yeah. Okay. The other point that I wanted to say on this was I studied too hard. Given that it was a 1-year program, I decided, and it was just my knee-jerk reaction. Like I studied engineering at undergrad, and for me, if someone gives me an exam, my competitive spirit kicks in, and I'm gonna crush this exam, and I'll pull an all-nighter if I have to, because it's a test given to me, and I will not fail tests.
Yeah.
Well, I have a few, but that's just like my competitive spirit. I wish I'd kicked that spirit in the head when I started the course, because I got a distinction and like dean's lists and stuff, and not a single person since I graduated has asked me, whether I got either of those things. Not a single person. My life has been not impacted by that in any way. And I missed so much cool stuff because I was locked up in the library studying some bullshit. I don't even remember what it was. A little bit of regret there.
I can identify with that, Sam. Look, I think during my first year, I was just so concerned about, studying. And then I think that the thing to know about this is you study enough or you read the case well enough so that you don't look like you're completely clueless in class. You always want to make a good enough impression. Once that impression is formed, you can very well, sail off into the sunset. The other thing is, look, you learn these classes genuinely to learn something that you want to, become better at. Like, whether it's accounting principles, whether it's, learn to be a better and more effective people manager, you learn that for your own knowledge, not to get a good grade, right? So I think that bias can sometimes, it helps set your priorities straight, essentially.
Yeah. So what I should have done, what he's saying, is I should have focused on, it's all right spending a lot of time studying something if it was something that I really cared about.
Correct.
Waste was studying stuff I didn't care about for the sake of the grade.
Yeah.
That's you're spot on. That's absolutely fine. And John, unusually, we're going to do a second bonus question just because.
All right.
Because we can, because I've got you and I want to. Now, it's a really, really long one, and I'm not going to put you through the pain of reading it all. But basically, OP has been admitted to Haas with a small scholarship and is also admitted / considering INSEAD and LBS. As I say, there's a lot going into this, but the key points are that OP is targeting MBB or T2 consulting, but isn't dead set on this. Would love the opportunity to work in the US to escape the UK wealth trap. Hey, I feel you. However, long-term, open to moving back to Europe. In other words, doesn't really know what he or she wants to do. Situation has been admitted to Haas with small scholarship, still going to require a big investment. Visas back on, it could happen. Also applied to LBS and INSEAD, and it looks like that's going to happen probably with a scholarship, or is hopeful. So let's assume that happens. Goal is MBB, and INSEAD is 1 year. So the ROI of MBB, INSEAD could be strong, but also LBS and Haas have more varied outcomes and more internship opportunities. LBS and INSEAD are probably more focused on London. That's fair. Haas is more has access to more US opportunities. So, John, what would you do between those two? Is basically what this comes down to.
Well, Sam, I'm a little biased, just having been a graduate in one of those schools. But let me try to assess this diplomatically. I think it is right for OP to have this dilemma because INSEAD sends the highest number of people into consulting. Something like 55% of their class go into consulting. Right. It's a consulting powerhouse for sure. But what I would say is for short-term US placement, I think, if OP is dead set on getting, consulting placement in the US, I would follow a US school. I see Haas and LBS as peer schools. And what's more, they have exchange programs with each other. During my time at Haas, I've seen LBS students spend a year, like a semester at our campus, and equivalently, Haas students were able to spend a semester at LBS campuses. So if you're looking for that, cross-border networking opportunity across schools, then Haas would be a good one. Vice versa, LBS would as well. But if you're dead set on working in the US, I would focus on Haas. If you're not sure, then I think both schools are fair game, in which case I would defect to the classic MBA answer of it depends.
Boo. Okay. I'm going to be a bit more direct. I'm going to say, look, it sounds to me like OP doesn't know what he or she wants to do. Has heard like MBB consulting, makes money, and so wants to do, because it's just there's not enough there. So I think for OP, the MBA journey primarily is about figuring out, using that breadth of experience to figure out what he or she wants to do. And that needs to be the focus. Now, you could do that at LBS, you could do that at INSEAD, you could do that at Haas. But The other thing is there's no point going into this and figuring out what you want to do only to come out with $200,000 of debt. And actually, it doesn't matter what you want to do because you get forced into consulting or banking to pay the debt back. So for me, this is an experiment of how can you go and find out what you want to do with the lowest possible debt? And that's what it comes down to. And for me, those European programs, particularly if OP can get a scholarship, you're more likely to come out unshackled with debt. John, I did a little bit of a search on this to sort of back my point here, which is gonna, as I know as a Brit, this is gonna hopefully talk wonders. I did a student loan payment calculator. Like I haven't updated the details. I've used the default interest rate and loan term, etc. But a 200 grand investment is going to be $3,700 a month in repayments. $3,700 a month in repayments. Now, there's no point going into an MBA and finding this dream industry that you want to go into only to graduate having to pay $3,700 a month in fees for your degree. You're back where you started in a way. So for me, it's about going in and getting that exposure with as little debt as possible. And for that reason, I would focus on whichever of these two schools, INSEAD or LBS, gives you the most scholarship.
Yeah. That's I think that's a sound way to think about it. I think that loan piece is going to play a huge role.
I think so. Okay, right. Well, that's our 2 cents. John, lovely to see you again. Really, really nice to catch up. If you are watching this and you would like to speak to me or John, we are in peak season right now for MBA applications. So join the line. But in all seriousness, you go to stanweeks.com and book an intro chat with one of us. We will do our best to make availability and meet you and talk about your specific situation, your target schools, what it would be like to work with an admissions consultant, etc. We're here and happy to help. John, lovely to see you again. Until next week. No, until later this week.
Yeah. See ya.
Take care.